Welcome again to Psychology 101. Now, this is your textbook. You either have one of these in your hands or you're fixing to get one in your hands. But I ask when you look and you received your textbook and you take a look and you look at this front cover and you think that's neat. Oh, think psychology, that looks good and everything. But wait a minute. But when we look at this, wait a minute, that's a picture of a brain. But in our generation, that doesn't bother us. That doesn't bother us that this is the inside of the brain. That doesn't bother us that doesn't bother us that somebody had to remove the skin, that somebody had to crack the skull, that somebody had to bust that all open. That doesn't bother us that somebody had to remove all of the bone and all of the skin, because we've grown up with medical technologies, and we've grown up, and that's the brain. But it wasn't always like that. And this is why psychology has really evolved into what it has today. It used to be that we had certain philosophers. And these philosophers, whatever they said, people kind of let them do the thinking. And the two philosophers in early day times were Socrates and Plato. And Socrates and Plato they would sit around and they would think about things, and they would let people know, here's what we think about these things. And people might agree or disagree, but that wasn't the nature of the age then. It's like I'm not in charge of the thinking. I have my job to do, and I go. Now in our society, we all are like, okay, we want you to think. We want you to make decisions, especially in America. We want you to question things. That's what college is about. We're not in the Socrates, Plato, where I think it's this, so we'll just believe that. But Socrates and Plato and other people of the early times felt like that you actually, when you died, that your heart continued to beat, your heart continued to beat, and your brain continued to work. And they felt that your soul was the inner working part of your body. And they didn't realize that stopped. They also thought that when you moved your finger or you moved your foot, that finger did the thinking. Oh, that finger thinks it'll move. This hand wants to pick up this book, so the hand thinks, pick up the book, and they didn't associate things with the mind. And then, as we begin to look at this and we say, wow, this is a human mind. This is a brain. This is something that used to be, if you mutilated a human body, the penalty was death. When Leonardo da Vinci died, before even modern psychology came about, Leonardo da Vinci worked in a period of time, and we know him because he painted. He was a great painter. He was a great inventor. He was a great discoverer. But we also, after he died, we found drawings where he had drawn all of the bones of the human body, all of the organs. He drew the brain. Pretty freaky, huh? It makes you wonder, now, where did Leonardo da Vinci see this brain? And what type of subject volunteered for this experiment? Not only that, Leonardo da Vinci also showed in a diagram, back before we had x-rays, back before we had MRIs, back before we had medical technology, he showed how a heart beats and where the blood goes from one chamber to the next. So, wow. So we had all these things going, but I want you to think back, and I want you to remember that psychology hasn't always been the psychology that we have today. So as we talk about psychology, we begin to work our way into it. Let's start out by defining psychology. Psychology is a scientific study of behavior and mental processes. Oh, so you mean to tell me the hand wasn't the mental process that picked up the book? No. The mind. Why do we do what we do, and what's the behavior that we see? So that's a definition for psychology, okay? Behavior and the mental processes. Well, let me tell you another big discovery that came about, famous discovery. And every time you take Psychology 101, Introduction to Psychology, somebody will say, oh, you learned about Erickson, different people. And another person, they will say, oh, so you learned about Phineas Gage. Well, let me tell you the story of Phineas Gage. Phineas Gage worked for the railroad. And once again, not the railroad now that drives off, gets on a locomotive and go. No, I mean a railroad where we started the railroad. Where we laid tracks, where we went out and we cut down trees, and then we cut those trees and we trimmed them out into railroad ties, and we laid them down, and we took these big spikes and we hit the spikes and we drove those into the ground to hold that, and then we put tracks on top of there. I mean, I'm talking where there were no roads, we were making a railroad. Well, Phineas Gage it was a rough business anyway, but Phineas Gage was the meanest man anybody knew. As a matter of fact, you didn't really say much to Phineas Gage, because if he got mad at you, he probably killed you. True story, no exaggeration. The meanest guy that people would know was Phineas Gage. Well, one day, Phineas Gage, working on this railroad back out in this undeveloped territory, took the big old spike, which now the spikes are about this long. Back then, the spikes had to be about that long. Took a spike, put it down on there, hit it with this big old hammer, and he hit it again and again, and when he hit it, the spike came up, actually went through his head and through his skull. Oh, as a matter of fact, later on when you get a chance, you go to page 23 of your book, and there's a picture of his skull with his spike in it. Famous picture. And it's the development of early psychology. Because what happened was, as soon as Phineas Gage did this, then Phineas Gage, well, we have to understand also, remember that the brain was something we didn't understand, and people thought that's where your soul was. So, believe it or not, if you had something go in your head, you didn't take it out. You left it in. So Phineas Gage lived with the spike through his head. But what happened was, and it was incredible, Phineas Gage went from the meanest man everybody knew to the nicest guy you'd ever want to meet. Oh, I'm so sorry, can I help you with this? And they were kind of like, this is the same guy that, probably would kill me for asking. So what happened was, when Phineas Gage had this go through his head, it separated the middle part of his brain that talks to each other back and forth, and we began to learn through a lot of research that we have two parts of the brain. There's actually several parts we'll learn about in this class. But two main parts. We have one part of our brain that's emotional, okay? That's emotional and creative. And then we have the separate part of the brain that's factual and it's analytical and logical. So we have this situation where Phineas Gage was coming from his analytical side, which said, if somebody's a problem, I'll just kill them. But see, when your brain is working properly, your emotional side says, no, I wouldn't want to kill somebody. So you're a product of both the right side of your brain and the left side of your brain. So that's the story of Phineas Gage. We had the spike go up through his head. Later on, when you get a chance, look at page 23. There's a little more about that story. But take a look at the skull with the spike through the head. It's amazing. Stayed in there until his death. And what you see on that page is a picture of his skull after he was dead with the spike in it. So amazing start to psychology. So what makes us who we are? We talked about right brain, left brain. Well, genetics and environment equals who you are. Now, it's kind of nice because sometimes we would like to think, oh, it's genetics. Oh, if I'm not good at math, maybe my parents weren't good at math and it's genetics. Okay? Or we might think, oh, it's more environment. It's more of what I'm around, the environment, what I'm taught, and all these different things. Now, let me tell you the true answer. If somebody says, is it genetics or is it environment for a particular thing that makes you, guess what? It's the whole equation. It's both. So if I say later, do you think it's more genetics or more environment? As much as we would like to make a case one way or the other, both come into play. So then we use the science word